Hello, I'm Mrs. Cain. I'm Mama Cain. I was to the Skyview kids Ma Cain, all one word, Ma Cain. And my life's work was I lived out my teacher calling. I was a teacher from 1967 until 2007. I was at public schools in Mon County, and I loved going to work every day. My work was enjoyable. I will tell you that the creation story that you've been reading and the one that you've been going over with Kevin is not the creation story that was in the textbooks that my students used, not the science textbook. I was a history teacher, geography teacher, and the story about creation of the earth and creation of man that was taught in those textbooks is not the creation story you've been reading, but it is what is taught in public schools. So my students had to know that story, and they would read, they would hear from the teacher that creation was spontaneous, that you could call it the Big Bang, that species evolved. They would change over time. This is a theory put out by Charles Darwin in the mid-1800s and seemed to catch on, and that these species would change. They would adapt to changes in their environment, and if they did not change, they would disappear. They would die. This is survival of the fittest. Do you know why you've never seen a dodo bird? Because they couldn't adapt to their surroundings. That's the theory put out by evolutionists. And some texts, more modern texts, include theory of intelligent design. They say, oh, there must have been some being that started this. So in some science and some history textbooks, that phrase, intelligent design, is mentioned, but usually in the science or history textbooks, it was just, spontaneous creation, evolution, Big Bang. Those were the things that the students were exposed to. So I wanted my students, and they only gave me the best kids, I wanted my students to be informed not only about what those textbooks said, but I wanted them to know that there were all sorts of different versions about creation. So I told them what is in your textbook is somebody's version of how the earth and how man got here. But I want to tell you some other versions. Every culture, every civilization has creation stories. For example, the Chinese, their story is about Pangu. And Pangu was this cosmic, selfless god who was encased in an egg. And he popped out of the egg, and ta-da, that was creation. Half of the egg became the sky. The bottom half of the egg became the earth. So those are the kind of stories that the Chinese told about creation. I will tell you that those wise, we always think about the Greeks as being wise. They told another story. They said, in the beginning, there was chaos. And then there was Mother Earth, Gaia. And Gaia was the mother of all life. Now, to create that life, she had to find a husband. And she liked the god of the sky. He was Uranus. So I would tell the kids, this is the story that the Greeks told. There is Mother Earth, Gaia, looking up at Uranus. And of course, all the kids would laugh, Mother Earth looking up at Uranus. But that was the story that the Greeks told about the beginning of the earth and the beginning of life. And then there were the Sumerians. Now, the Sumerians, we're going to be talking about them a lot in the book of Genesis, because that's the area where Eden probably was. That's the area where Father Abraham came from. And in Sumer, they had many gods. They had hundreds of gods, and these are just two of the examples. And their version of creation said that there was the first father and the first mother, and they had many children, and every generation of children became bigger and stronger and more powerful than those two original parents. And eventually, the god Marduk, which became their chief god, killed first father and he killed first mother. He split the body of first mother, and the top half of her became the sky, and the bottom half became the earth. So that's a story told in the area there of the Tigris-Euphrates river valley. So because we live in a special place in this country, I wanted the kids to know another version. Now, you have to remember this is public school, and even though I'm Christian, not everybody in my class, especially at Morgantown High, which is like a mini United Nations, I had students from all over the world who went home and did not speak English at the table, who were from every religion. I've had Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Taoists. I've had even some Satanists. I've had every religion in the world. So when I was telling them this story, I was walking that very fine line, but I prefaced this story by telling them that we live in a unique area of the United States. We live in the Bible Belt, and so we are 9 miles south of the Mason-Dixon line, so we are not very far into the Bible Belt. But the further you go, the more Bible-oriented, the more Bible-believing you would find the population who would be in public school. So I would tell them that because we live in the Bible Belt, I want them to know this version of creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And he saw that it was good, and he separated the light from the darkness, and the light he called day, and the darkness he called night. And that was the evening and the morning of the first day. So I told that story because some may have never heard that story. For some of my students, that was a familiar story to them, but I wanted them to know that that story was another version of how the earth and how mankind got to be here. So the kids would inevitably say, "So which version should we believe in?" Oh, you can know all of the versions, but you have to decide for yourself when you weigh all of the facts. And you know, this is a verse from the Bible. This is John 8:32. And I had this on a sign up on my wall because many times as we were studying history, the kids would say, "So what is the real story?" And I would say, Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So you have to look at all of these versions. And some of this, maybe you say, "Oh, yeah, I can buy that. I believe that." And some of it, maybe you're just, you're still trying to weigh all the evidence. But in the end, everybody has to decide what they believe about the origins of the earth, what they believe about the origins of man. Now, I had a big file cabinet that had 5 or 6 shelves on it, and I had a magnet on there of this picture. And I would turn around and I would point to that picture, and I said, I love this picture. I love this version of creation. This is on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And Michelangelo painted God and Adam. And then he took man from the dust of the earth and formed him into a man and breathed into his nostrils the gift of life, and he became a living, breathing human being. That's the story I love, I would tell them. So everybody has to decide that for themselves. But I will tell you that this is a dilemma, and sometimes there are folks on one side or the other. Do you believe in history, in science, or do you believe in the Bible? Are you an evolutionist, a Big Bang Theory person, spontaneous creation, or do you believe that God created? So you have to look at all of the evidence and you have to weigh it out. And sometimes there are hardliners on this side, and sometimes there are hardliners on this side, and they don't want to talk about the other version. Well, you can't ignore science. You can't ignore history. You can't ignore what the Bible says. So how do you put it all together? How do you reconcile all of this information? Well, you have to do that for yourself. But I will tell you, they don't oppose each other. They actually complement each other. And you can be a Christian who is a scientist, and those scientists will come to the same conclusions as an atheist if they study the facts. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite places around here, where I always take the visitors, is to Cooper's Rock. So we're up on Cooper's Rock. Kevin had some missionaries who were staying with us. We're standing on Cooper's Rock, and I said, you know, this rock has a mate right across the canyon, and it really, you can get to it from the Snake Hill Road. And I said they used to be joined together before the Cheat River cut this canyon. And they were like, well, that never happened. Well, you have to look at the facts. You have to look at the geology. You have to look what scientists have uncovered. But you can put that together. Who made that rock? I would say God. And who made that river cut down over the centuries, over the millennia, into that part of our geography to make that canyon? And who split that rock? My grandfather used to say, someday Cooper's Rock's just going to tumble on down to the river. And maybe that will happen. Maybe that's part of the evolution, the science. But you can put that together. Have you ever gone east on I-68, past Sidling Hill? You can see the layers. You can see that with your own eyes. But who made those layers? Who pushed that soil on that plate up and made that mountain there at Sidling Mountain? Well, I would say God. Now, scientists might have a different version, but you can see that with your own eyes. So you can reconcile science, history, the Bible. You just have to look at it all. The ultimate decision is, though, how did it get created? And it was God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He's the one that formed Adam from the dust of the earth and breathed into his nostrils. It is God. Now, sometimes scientists have a hard time saying something supernatural like God, because you can't prove God. Well, you can believe. And belief is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so you have to reconcile that in all of those facts, those versions in your own mind, and decide what is the truth, and the truth will set you free. As you've been reading about Adam and Eve, you've learned that they were put in the Garden of Eden. And where is Eden? So in your packet, is a map of an important area of the world. Even today, it's an important area. And I wanted you to be able to see what the Bible says. This is the geography that is mentioned in the Bible. Can we exactly pinpoint where Eden was? No, but we have some clues that the Bible gave us. First of all, it said that there were headwaters that divided into 4 rivers. And those 4 rivers, 2 of them we absolutely can identify. The third one, maybe because of where it says it flows through, and the 4th one we aren't sure where it was. So the rivers that the Bible mentions that flow, that water Eden into, making it into a garden, are the Pishon, and we have no clue where that was. But there is the Gihon, and the Gihon flowed through the area that is called Cush in ancient times, or Ethiopia. So we think that the Gihon might be the Nile, because Cush is to the south of the Nile. In Ethiopia, one of the main branches, the White Nile and the Blue Nile, join to form the main part of the Nile. And the one branch starts in Ethiopia. So probably the Gihon River is the Nile. But then by name, the Bible states that Eden was watered by the Tigris and the Euphrates. Well, we know those 2 rivers because they flow through pretty much, they start up in Turkey, but those are the rivers in Iraq. So when we hear the news and, American troops are in Iraq, that's the Tigris-Euphrates. So that's what you can look at on this map. And the Tigris, I always used to tell the kids you can keep them straight because the Tigris has the shorter name and it's the shorter river. The Euphrates has the longer name, it's the longer river. But they flow through what is now the country of Iraq and empty into the Persian Gulf. And that, because the Bible labels it, that's probably the location. Now, if you notice, there's this whole green area here on the map, and that is the Fertile Crescent. And that goes from the Persian Gulf all the way over to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, everything around it is desert, but because those rivers flow through there and because they flood every year, that area in the Tigris-Euphrates is well watered. And so it's called Fertile Crescent because, first of all, it's fertile. That's why they colored it green on this map. And crescent because it is crescent-shaped. So in between the rivers, you may hear this term, is an area called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia just means, meso means middle, potamia, like hippopotamus, means rivers. So in the middle of the rivers, and that's the area that we are going to be looking at for a whole lot of the stories that we read in the book of Genesis, Mesopotamia. Father Abraham came from Mesopotamia in an area down near the Persian Gulf that we call Sumer, and he was Sumerian. He was from a city-state there called Ur, and they have found the ruins of that city, and it's really important. This whole area is important for you to know where that is for the study of the book of Genesis.